I'm Chris Littlewood. I work for Filtered, and we use technology to personalize learning. What we want to do is to make recommendations to learners that are going to add the most value for them and for their organizations. So trying to identify those valuable bits of learning from portfolios of content, libraries, and what have you. What I'd like to talk about today is artificial intelligence and its strengths in particular, and how those strengths can be applied to L&D, how we can make the most of them. I'm going to try and cover quite a bit in the talk, but any questions that I provoke, anything that is a little bit unclear at the end of it, please come and have a chat to us. We're on D11, just across the way there. We're here both days, so come and say hello. We're in the business of trying to identify and give people what they want or what they need, obviously in particular in learning. And this sort of problem, the idea of trying to identify what people want and give it to them, has been done before in lots of other sectors, at least a form of it has. So for example, if we think about the music industry, then Spotify have built a business in large part because they've been able to make recommendations of tunes to people that are going to suit their tastes and that they want to listen to. Netflix have done a similar thing in entertainment and television. Airbnb are in the business of trying to match people to accommodation that suits their particular requirements. And so on, across a host of sectors, businesses have grown up which are about connecting people with services and products that suit their particular requirements. The reason that, for mentioning these is because there are some common themes throughout each of these sectors. There's commonalities between the problems that they've tried to solve. So first of all, if we think about the people, the customers of these businesses, then they have diverse requirements, complicated and diverse requirements. So taste in music typically differs from person to person, of course, and it differs in a complicated way. It's not as simple as, can't be expressed as simply as I like this genre of music. It's more subtle than that. It might depend on artist, might depend on mood, might depend on style of song, all sorts of things. And that's true across the board, all of them, all of these sectors. The requirements, the needs on the part of the people using them are complicated, hard to express. On the supply side, on the sort of solution side of these businesses, then again we see a rich and diverse range of possible solutions. So if you think about tunes again, obviously there's a plethora, an amazing number of tunes that might suit my personal taste. Similarly with accommodation or information on Google, products on Amazon. And so you've got diversity of requirement, diversity of solution, and we've also got, for all of these businesses, a similar approach to trying to solve the problem of connecting the two. They all use, to a greater or lesser extent, algorithms and artificial intelligence to do that job of connecting people to what they might need. And of course they do that because it's the only practical way of solving the problem at this sort of scale that they want to operate. If you have as many songs as there are, if you have as many customers as Spotify aim to have, then you can only do that if you can automate it in some way. So these three characteristics, well, two of these characteristics at least, are present in learning. So in learning, of course, we have very diverse motivations, requirements on the part of us as learners, whether that's at the sort of strategic level, if I'm looking to build my capabilities in the long term for the requirements of my role, for future requirements of my role, or for in support of my career, then that will differ from other people's objectives. And similarly, even at the tactical level, if I'm talking about training in support of a particular project I'm working on, or even a particular task I'm engaged in, then that differs project to project, task to task. So we have a diversity of requirements, obviously, in learning and development. And I'd also argue we've got a very rich resource in terms of content in L&D. Whether that's MOOCs, freely available stuff online like TED, YouTube, amazing resources now, in our own organizations, in our learning management systems. We've got libraries that have been bought in, internally produced content. So I don't often hear that there is a shortage of content in the industry. I do often hear that it's hard to get to the valuable stuff or the relevant stuff because of the overwhelming volume of content in general. So this is what we're trying to do in L&D. It's to do what's happened in those other industries, to make those algorithmic, artificial intelligence, data-driven connections between requirements on the part of learners and solutions, i.e. content of any sort. I said that there are some similarities between those sectors, between each of those sectors, and of course between them and learning. But there are also differences. One of them, for example, is how obvious it is that you've made a good recommendation. So if I'm recommending a tune on Spotify, I can probably make a good assessment as to whether that's a decent recommendation for me quickly. I maybe need to listen to a part of it only, maybe need to listen to it a couple of times, absolute max. Whereas with learning, of course, there's a delay between learning and the skills development and, of course, the eventual impact on the organisation. So there's a difference there that needs to be thought through. There's also a difference in the sense, from some of those sectors at least, because, again, if I think about a tune, then being recommended more of the same might well be a good solution. If I'm recommended more stuff that's the same sort that I like, then that might well be a good solution in the music industry. Whereas in learning, by definition, when we're learning, we're trying to extend our capabilities. We're trying to learn things that either we don't know about, we aren't skilled in, or we want to increase our proficiency in. So the echo chamber that might work in Spotify doesn't work in L&D. That's not a great solution if we want to recommend good learning. Maybe the main overarching difference when it comes to L&D from those other sectors where recommendations play a part is the primary focus of learning, i.e. skills or competency, proficiency development. And this is how we sort of structure the question when we're trying to solve it, how we see it. So yeah, along the bottom there, of course we're trying to connect to learner with training. That's fundamentally what we're trying to do in our products. But also, we're trying to understand the relationship between a learner and skills. So what skills are going to add most value in a particular role? Which skills gaps on the part of a learner are most holding them back in terms of delivering for their organisation? And then the right-hand side of this triangle, the connection between skills and training. So which individual pieces of learning are going to best build which particular sorts of skills and how? So this is what we've done. We've built a product. This is called Global Filter. It's a learning recommendation engine. It's designed to point at a library or mix of libraries of content to work flexibly with content that might be well structured, well mapped, and also content that's in a relatively raw form, isn't well understood, and isn't well structured. And it will tag, label, organize that content according to a framework that suits the particular client. So if a client has a particular competency framework or an initiative that they want to build particular skills, then we can present that content library, those content libraries in that format. And finally, for every learner, we want to prioritize that. So we're surfacing the recommendations from within whatever body of content we're pointing at. They're going to make the most difference for the individual sitting in front of the screen. I'll come back to a little bit to this product at the end of the talk when I'll explain how you can get your hands on an instance of this. But of course, please come and chat to us, and we'll give you a demo or a way to sign up for it. So I've talked about what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a learning recommendation engine and make good learning recommendations for individuals and their organizations. How is AI a useful tool in that endeavor? I'm going to try and illustrate that with a couple of examples. This first one you will probably have heard of if you follow artificial intelligence. It's a famous recent example of achievement in AI. But there's something particular about this example that I want to draw out that's relevant for what we're trying to do in L&D. So this is a board game called Go. It originated in China. It's very popular in China, Japan, South Korea. It was in the news because recently an algorithm, an artificial intelligence, beat the human world champion at this game. Actually, a couple of them, Lisa Doll and KG, in successive years, were beaten by this algorithm which is called AlphaGo, developed by a company called DeepMind, who specialize in AI. The reason they picked on Go as a challenge is because this is a difficult artificial intelligence problem. It wasn't expected to be solved for a number of years in terms of the people's expectations of the rate of progress in AI. The reason it's difficult is because Go has a fantastic number of potential moves throughout the game, a large number at any particular point in the game. So even compared to something, a game as complex as chess, Go has got astronomically larger number of possible permutations, possible games. So that means that a computer can't brute force calculate its way through a game. It can't say, you know, if I move here, then they might move there, then and so on and so forth, and that tree. That's computationally impossible at current levels of computing and any predicted levels of computing. So if you're building an algorithm to play this, you need to build it in a different way. You can't just brute force your way through the problem. You have to train it to play in the way, as I would describe it, a more human way. I.e., you need it to spot patterns, to develop strategies, to spot general board situations which might lead to success and weakness, and so make the moves that way in a more intuitive seeming way. So, DeepMind was successful at this, the AlphaGo program beat the world champion, as I've said. The thing that's important, I think, for L&D is how they went about training the algorithm. What they did was they took a big database of games of Go, not played between grandmasters, not the cream of the world's Go players, but actually played between strong amateur players, club players of the game. So these are good Go players, but they'd have no chance against the world champion. And they trained the artificial intelligence AlphaGo not to play Go brilliantly, but to emulate the play of those strong amateurs. And this is the thing that's key. Artificial intelligence, these deep neural networks, layers of neural networks, are very flexible, and they can be trained to copy. They can be trained to do a task by copying human performance and human decision making at it. And that's the key thing that I want to make the point about. In actual fact, the way that they got it to beat the world champion then was they got it to play itself over and over again and learn which strategies led to promising positions and victories, and which led to losses. And so it could iterate from there, but get better and better to the point where it could beat a world champion. The second example, this is another Google company or a Google initiative. What they tried to do was train an artificial intelligence, a deep neural network, to recognize drawings. So they built a website and asked people to draw stuff, sketch it out, draw a banana, draw a boat. The algorithm would have a go at guessing it, and it would get progressively better and better as it got feedback on when it was when it was correctly guessing what people were drawing. So by the end of it, this algorithm was very good. In fact, because it worked from the start, the point at which you started drawing, it could guess from before even a human would recognize it, because the algorithm had the information about where people started to draw from and the rest of it. Anyway, the point is that you don't need to tell the algorithm what a bridge is. You don't need to tell it what the components of a bridge should be. All you need to do is show it loads of examples of people's drawing of bridges, and it can become very proficient at doing that human-like task of identifying what a drawing is. So what's the read across to L&D? Well, the read across is just that emulation. In L&D, there are lots of tasks which humans are good at, but which economics, practicality, cost mean we can't scale very effectively. So we might have an initiative in L&D that's focused on a small cohort within our organization, or we might have a curation initiative that's focused on a limited number of assets. Those are things that an L&D team can do a very successful job at. But what is difficult is then scaling that to work for all assets or all of the audience that we might want to push that learning and development towards. So this is what L&D can do. Going back to our sort of framework for thinking about this, I'm not going to go through this slide in any particular detail, but this is basically what we have been doing, building algorithms which work across parts of this problem, the connection between learner and training and skills gaps, and learners and skills gaps. Building algorithms and artificial intelligence which can emulate human decision making. So I'm just going to use one of these as an example. So if we take the tagging algorithm here on the bottom right, what that's aimed at doing is just taking a library of content and applying a competency framework to that content. So, and the way that we can train it to do that is just by showing it examples of well-mapped learning assets. And then it can roll forward that decision making to a big library, and you can scale this a lot more successfully and economically. More generally, there's a whole load of tasks that we could apply AI to in L&D. So that might be, and some of these are very difficult to write rules for. So if we think about, for example, selecting content for organizational fit, that's quite a difficult thing to communicate, to write rules for. But often it's the sort of thing that a human is very capable at. We can recognize it when we see it. We just don't know how to express what that organizational fit might exactly be. We don't need to express what it might exactly be. We can just produce examples of it and get an AI to copy that decision making. To conclude, I just want to talk about a particular instance of our global filter product, because I think that will make some of what I'm saying a little bit more concrete, and hopefully is a way of you getting your hands on an example of this and seeing what it can do, and I hope as well derive some value from it personally. So we worked with Blue Eskimo because obviously of their expertise in this sector. And what we did was we curated a bunch of content, some of it L&D specific, as in focused on L&D skills in particular, some of it more general skills that we felt were useful for this community. We developed a framework of competencies with which we could structure, classify that content, and we worked with Blue Eskimo to understand roles in L&D, how people would describe themselves and recognize themselves, and how the skills required and the assets that might support those skills would vary between those roles. And you can get your hands on this. So this is an example of that instance. At this point in the product, it's just building a bit of a profile. So when you arrive at Global Filter, then the first thing we want to do is get a minimum of information about you, so we can start making some recommendations that are from the outset personal to you. But we don't want to take up too much of your time then. So we ask a few questions. So in this case, we'll ask about what your role is in L&D. That'll help us make an initial prioritization of recommendations for you, and then we can go from there to build a bit more understanding of you, whether that's by asking more questions or whether it's just inferred from your usage, what you actually end up finding useful from those recommendations. And this is just a screenshot from the dashboard of that product, so can't read that from where I'm standing, but we got, so these are organized by skills here. So the top row of recommendations here is around community management. The one below that is live and virtual delivery. Each of these rectangles, if clicked on, produces a summary of that asset from where you can launch it and engage with it if it's something that you think is going to be valuable. That's all I wanted to say. We're just D11, just here. At 4 o'clock today, then we are hosting drinks on the stand. Come and have a chat to us there and ask more questions. We can give you a demo. We can also show you how to sign up for this free L&D version of the product, and that's perhaps the best way of getting to understand it and what it can do, and what it might be able to do applied to some of your problems back in your organizations. So thanks very much, everyone.